The government's Road Safety Investigation Branch will analyse collisions in a similar way to air and rail disasters. According to a recent poll, over 60% of British drivers think that hard shoulders should return. We're asking, should smart motorways be scrapped or at the very least substantially remodelled? We're joined by former Met Police Traffic Sergeant Mike Rawson and lorry driver Sebastian Garner, who, I think I'm right in saying, Sebastian, you find yourself a fan of smart motorways because of what they do to congestion.
Well, they certainly help with the traffic flow, that is for sure, because you've now got 4 lanes to choose from. We're compared to with three lanes. So yes, it does help tremendously. But I accept that there are some issues with the new smart motorways. And I think it's down to people need to educate the new way of motorways from now on.
Yeah. Mike Rawson, what would you change, if anything, about them?
I would reinstate hard shoulders as a matter of urgency.
How easy is that to do, Mike?
I don't think it's particularly difficult, Colin. Each stretch of smart motorway would have to be surveyed and costed. But to be honest, what price a human life?
Well, I suppose there is a price, and it's in no way to compare it to that of a human life, obviously. But I suppose the price, if I can put it that way, Sebastian, is that there would be more congestion, wouldn't there? Suddenly you're funneling 4 lanes of traffic, Sebastian, into just the 3.
Well, I accept that there are some issues, but the interesting thing is there are deaths on 3-lane motorways. You've also got to take into account, you look at the A14 that's just recently been expanded. That's now become a dual carriageway, but a 3-lane dual carriageway, but still no hard shoulder. But you can still drive at the same speed on a dual carriageway as you can for a motorway. So I can't just see quite where Mike's coming from on this. What we need to do is we need to educate people to drive on the new smart motorways. I mean, I drive every day, 5 days a week. How often do I see somebody or a new learner driver on a motorway? We don't seem to educate people how to use a smart motorway. There are SOS places where people can get refuge if they break down. But most people suddenly see a warning light, they suddenly think they've got to stop and pull over. They don't try and limp to those refuge areas. They just suddenly stop dead on the motorway. And this is where we need to be educating people to understand how a smart motorway works. And in my opinion, they do work so long as people know how to use them.
Mike,
the hard shoulder equally is a dangerous place as well. And we've seen people pull up on the hard shoulder. We've equally seen people leaving a hard shoulder. They think it's just like a T-junction. They just pull out in front of you. I had a woman the other day literally just pull out in front of me. So there are pros and cons, but we've had motorways since 1958. We've had, sadly, we have had deaths on 3-lane motorways. But it would be interesting to see how many deaths we've had on smart motorways since they were installed in comparison to a 3-lane motorway.
Mike Rawson, answer some of those points if you like, but also just on the point about there being a new institution, organisation, body, agency that will look closely at cases like this, because it seems to me this has been a story in the news for 2 or 3 years now, smart motorways, are they safe or they're not? And it's fallen to a couple of very high profile, one in particular, campaigner who lost a loved one in a crash on a smart motorway, to raise this as a subject. At least now we can be satisfied or safe in the knowledge that there is experts will look at this and arrive at a determination about what actually really caused a crash.
Well, just to answer the question about hard shoulders, let me clarify, if I may. When I say reinstate hard shoulders, I mean reinstate hard shoulders, keeping the 4 lanes of traffic. Just add the hard shoulder between the motorway bridges. So there's very little work, and the Transport Secretary is very disingenuous when he claims it would cost billions of pounds to reinstate the hard shoulder. On the question of the investigative body that you mentioned, I've thought about this, that, as you know, the police are responsible for the investigation of fatalities and serious collisions, and they represent Her Majesty's coroners, as well as provide the Crown Prosecution Service with the evidence to prosecute motorists who have erred. Now, maybe this new body, based on the Air Accident Investigation Branch, which I have a great deal of respect for, maybe it will concentrate the government's mind a little more on the dangers of smart motorways with no hard shoulder. I would just say this about if you break down. Yes, sometimes you can coast to the nearest emergency refuge area, but when you lose all power, or maybe you suffer a couple of punctures, you cannot coast. And I know one thing, I don't claim that hard shoulders are totally safe. But if I had to choose between breaking down and being on a hard shoulder or being in a live lane in the path of a 40-ton truck, I know which choice I'd rather make.
Sebastian, we'll give you the last word, and the point that Mike raises there is an important one. There is a difference between the hard shoulder and these refuges, and getting to them if you can.
I couldn't agree with you. I couldn't agree more with Mike. But equally, I can't see how a hard shoulder is going to be put onto a 4-lane motorway or a smart motorway now, because the 4th lane now takes up the whole width of the motorway. So I can't see how he's going to fit another hard shoulder in, quite frankly, and it would mean taking massive banks out in some places to get the hard shoulder on. But equally, I accept that there are times when you can't get to the refuge area. But maybe that what we need to do is educate people to be more vigilant and to observe other motorists if they do break down. I think it's more what we need is more education for smart motorways and make people understand the logistics and how they're working. And I think that was where we need to be concentrating more at this moment in time, even if it's just an interim situation. But I think certainly the Highways Agency and the government need to be possibly putting out adverts and explaining how a smart motorway works. I think it's down to education. It's not down to the actual workings of it. But I think if people understand how it works, I'm pretty sure that we'll get over this problem.
Mike Rawson, Sebastian Garner, we have to leave it there. It's one we'll return to, but thanks for your time both. Emails briefly on migrants, lots of them